listeners. Welcome back to another empowering episode of Fire Your Boss Fridays. I'm your host, Chad Passa, and my lovely wife, Lisa, is joining us here today at co-hosting, and we're about to go on I'm going to call it a transformational journey of entrepreneur. Yeah, that's the word. See, I knew you were going to come in valuable today, of entrepreneurship. And what we do and what we focus on here on this podcast is helping you to steal your life back, fire your boss, and transform into a life full of purpose. Today, we have a special guest, Pete Sena, and I believe he embodies the principles that we believe in with his remarkable story that I've dove into. And he's not only ventured successfully into entrepreneurship, but also faced the edge of burnout. Some of you might be there right now. I can assure you, as an entrepreneur, you will find it.
Speaking of burnout,
am I right,
my
Pete?
cell phone just buzzing. I thought I had it on silent. Sorry about that, guys.
Oh, that's okay. So, and then basically Pete emerged to be a stronger individual through his story that I read, and with a newfound philosophy for life and work, which is pretty cool. And so we're going to dive into that, and this might help some of you. So Pete found his ikigai. Am I pronouncing that right?
I'm nervous to pronounce it because I feel like it's a Japanese concept that, believe it or not, doesn't actually originate from work, right? So I can talk a little bit about like how I found ikigai, which I think I'm pronouncing correctly, and ultimately how it's been a driving force for me. But I did not invent that concept, and I want to make sure that I properly attribute it and don't appropriate it. But we can cover that.
Amen. Cool. Well, I think it's what brings you and I together, and that's why I brought it up. So it is a really cool. So we don't have to go into it deep. If you want to dive into Ikigai specifically, you can, but we're going to talk about it and what is done specifically for Pete and how we, how it follows kind of our guidelines and what we do and our principles that we live by as well. So there's some specific tips. So we have kind of what we call milestones in business and entrepreneurship. We call it steal your life back, which at some point you have to realize, hey, something's got to give, right, Pete? So, and then of course you got to fire your boss. And then the end goal is really to live a life full of purpose. So Pete, I'm going to let you take the stage here. Can you introduce yourself, of course, tell everyone about you, all the listeners. I'm sure they want to know. They've been hearing me, blah, 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 blah. Can you share some specific steps you took in removing like the liabilities in your life before you felt like you officially stole it back, took that leap?
Yeah, no, for sure. And look, to everyone that's listening here, I mean, I'll tell you about myself in just a second, but what I would say is like I can share my journey, and everybody's journey is different, and I do not proclaim to be an expert in anything but marketing and branding. When it comes to marketing and branding, I can say I'm an expert. Everything else is just figuring it out. So my name is Pete Sena. Thanks for having me on the show. I love what you guys stand for and what you're doing, and it's one of the reasons why I was super stoked to be here today. So I am a creative entrepreneur, and people might be listening saying, well, what the hell does that mean, right? And ultimately, I start businesses, I build businesses, and I invest in businesses. That's just sort of the highest level. And I have been doing this for a really long time. So been building businesses for over 20 years. Started my first business, which was a digital agency, while I was in my college dorm room. And that's a funny story, maybe for another time, but probably less relevant for this audience. But went on to build that business. And when you're building any kind of business, you are like facing all these different challenges. And I won't even pretend to like capture all of them, but like you got financial challenges, you got stress challenges, you got, maybe it's partnership or employee or client challenges, whatever the situation might be, customer challenges. So I think the thing that I came to realize when I hit burnout and basically had like pretty much, I guess, an almost dictionary definition of a nervous breakdown if you were to Google it, right? And just to kind of get real personal for the audience here, I remember it was a Friday and I was having like tunnel vision and real bad anxiety, and my arm went numb, and I thought I was having a heart attack. I thought I was going to like stroke out and die. And
that was it. Say goodbye. Start waving goodbye.
So,
wow. Yeah.
And yeah, so I end up going, seeing my doctor, getting an EKG, doing that stuff. Knock on wood, thank God, everything was okay. But it was a really severe anxiety attack. And I was not someone that was prone to those before, so it was really shocking. And the doctor comes in and he says, you got a choice. He's like, you know, you can lower your stress levels, which I don't know how you're going to do because you're an entrepreneur. He goes, and he asked me all these questions. He goes, or, you know, you can take this, like, he like passes me like the name of a prescription. He's like, you can take this, but there's all these side effects. And I won't get into too personal, but let's just say some of those side effects I just thought might affect my life, if you catch my drift. So in that, he's like, or you can kind of like try this meditation thing. And he sort of shrugged it off. And what's interesting is I'm a big believer in patterns, right? When things show up, they show up in threes, they show up in patterns. My sort of computer, you know, programmer brain in me sort of sees those patterns. So that moment happened for me, and I realized that I was not just a workaholic. I was not just burning myself out, not taking care of myself. I had gained a bunch of weight. I just wasn't in a good place, right? And I think when I hit that,
and this was during like that moment, and that this is what you're witnessing.
100%, like
right?
just being much more present. That these are all the things that had happened that I just had tunnel vision lost sight of, right? So at the same time, my brother hands me a book, and I've written about this, so this is not the first time I've told this story. And my brother, at the time we were working together, and he handed me a book called 10% Happier. And on the Post-it note was like a really personal note to me, which kind of got me like really upset, getting choked up even thinking about it right now. And it was like, I'm worried about you. You're not the same person that I know. Like this, like all these things are like eating you alive. And you're not the same person, I'm worried about you, and, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So I read the book, and ironically, the book is about meditation. So the book is written by a guy named Dan Harris. Dan Harris apparently was a national news anchor. He was on television, and he had like a Jim Carrey, like, you know, blah, 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 blah moment on TV where he breaks down. And we laugh about it now, but it was basically a breakdown.
Right, yes.
Now, unlike Dan Harris, who very openly talked about his struggles with drug abuse and those kinds of things, the only drug I was on at the time was way too much freaking caffeine, right? Way too much Red Bull, way too much Starbucks. But I wasn't doing any other drugs. And I say that not to mock anybody else, but that this is my story.
Or anything,
right? And I can only own that. So needless to say, now I've seen this meditation thing a couple times. I start looking into self-care. I start looking to these different things. And all of it's about being present. And then I start going on this journey, and I'm a digger. I'm a curious guy, right? So I start going down this rabbit hole, and that is ultimately where I realized that I was burning out. I was not taking good care of myself, and it was affecting relationships in my life. It was affecting my relationship with my then girlfriend, who is now my wife. Thank God that she stuck around, and I managed to make some changes. But I realized that something's got to give, right? You know, running a multi-million dollar company is one thing, but like, what good is it if it leads to lack of health or failed relationships or all those kinds of things? So
anxiety attacks.
Yeah, and anxiety attacks, right? Which were fucking crazy. I've literally felt like I was dying. So needless to say, I started making a lot of changes. And one of the changes I made was seeking out purpose. And that's ultimately where I discovered this book called Blue Zones, which is a book that talks about the places in the world where people live the longest and most fulfilled lives. And one of those places in the world, Chad and Lisa, was this place called Okinawa, Japan. And Okinawa, Japan...
And we all also know about Okinawa because it was in Karate Kid.
Amen.
Okay, so I know a lot of you guys know about it.
Amen, right? So apparently in Okinawa, Japan, people live these really, really happy lives. When you dig into it, it's a sense of community. It's a sense of connection. It's a sense of purpose. Certainly there's the diet and the different things that they put into there. But I sort of threw that one out the window as an Italian who pretty much eats, you know, meat, cheese with meat and more carbs. I was like, I'll throw the diet thing out, but I'll do everything else, right? And this concept they have is this concept called ikigai. And essentially it's like a raison d'etre or a reason for living. So I started to dive into that in terms of what is that? What is that connected thing? And that's ultimately where I understood all the different sort of concentric circles, right? And as a strategist, like, we love a good Venn diagram, right? Like, you know, we love a good picture, a good little thing, right? So for me, what that came down to is like, what are the things that make you feel fulfilled? So I started to kind of zero in on that. Apparently, I wasn't the only one thinking about it, right? Apparently, there's a lot of other people that have found this concept, and they took the concept and they sort of made it their own. And by they, I mean business people on the internet. And essentially, for those that don't know what it is, it's the intersection of what are the things that you love to do, what are the things that you're good at, what are the things that the world needs or people need, and what are the things you get paid to do. And if you could find the center of all those different circles, then you can sort of plug into that ikigai.
And that was in your blog. Like, I noticed there was some circles in there, right? And it gives you a diagram, right? So that you can kind of assess it on your own. That's cool. Okay.
Yeah, 100%. So I tell that story just because, you know, I've been on a lot of podcasts where people want to know, like, you know, how do you build your first $1 million business and how do you invest in businesses? And I love to give advice like that.
That is the foundation. Yeah, isn't it the foundation, right? Because that's where the core of everything is that you do that's great comes from you.
Yeah.
Right? You can learn. I've seen people learn amazing things and have access to amazing products and services and mentorships, but it's the best version of you that goes out and makes all that, like, sends that authentic message to the world, and which is, you have to have that. But I think, I mean, I was one who thought, no way, that's not how it works. And I just, pushed hard. I'll just push harder. I'll just go harder. Right. And that, that's what leads to that breakdown. Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, go.
You push harder until you can't push ananymore. And then you have to realize that's
because it doesn't work.
Yeah.
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 So I hope that's helpful for you in the audience. I mean, that's what drove me to, I think, a breaking point moment, which I think opened up a lot of new possibilities for me in my life.
It was, so you were kind of nudged there, and then you also had some guidance. You had people and love around you that made that possible, and hopefully you guys have that as well. But these questions that I put together for you, this would be a great place to kind of drop them in. Yeah, because now that we know that this Ikigai is, something that you can dive into on your own and create your own personal journey, just like Pete said, listen, it's your story, people. Start writing it. Get your journal out and start today. These are controversial questions, right? There's no right or wrong answer depending who you're having the conversation with. And now, Pete, we're having the conversation with you based on what you just said. Totally. What is your response to those who argue that doing what you love is unrealistic and only suitable for privileged people who it just lines up perfectly for them?
Well, I would say fuck those people personally, but because I think that the reality is, like, you can have your cake and eat it too, but you just have to understand that there's a way to do it, right? So, like, I'll tell you a quick story, right? I have a friend of mine who, I won't say his name, but he's worth millions and millions of dollars, and he's, he flies private, and he's got multiple houses, and he's got every possible possession you could think of that money can buy, from like Lamborghinis to crazy expensive pools and everything, right? He's a friend of mine.
Stereotypical money guy, right? Got it figured out somehow from the perspective of society.
Yeah, I mean, like, he's got the watches, he's got everything. Like, it's, overcompensate alley, right?
Does he have the hair, Pete? Does he have my wife's hair?
He doesn't have your wife's hair, no, honestly.
Man, he would be trouble if he had some of that too, man. Holy cow. I'm just kidding.
He would, like, honestly, both you guys have really good hair. That was the first thing I noticed about it when jumping on this pod.
This is podcast can turn into a hair podcast. But yeah.
Listen, flaunt your stuff, right? So, but needless to say, I tell you that because he's absolutely miserable. He is extremely miserable. And then I have a friend, and she lives.
And you say this from where, though? Like, you're saying it from a sense of, like, you're my bro. I would want the best for you, and I don't think that's here for you. I'm not sure what you're missing. Is that what I'm hearing?
So let me give you the polls, right?
Yeah.
On both sides of the poll, because I want to answer your question, right? But I think examples are helpful. Then I have a friend of mine who is, like, basically lives in the woods in Colorado, and she makes just enough income to kind of squeak by and pay all our bills. And she's one of the happiest people that I know, right? Loving life, like literally only works just the bare minimum to be able to live life, right? Mm-hmm. So these are like extreme cases, right? You've got one person who's just like all about living life, like, like working just enough so that they can live, and like really, like, then you got the other side of it with this person just living to work, right? One's super happy, one's not happy. Now, this is the problem, is like people think of things in like what I call Instagram moments, right? Where it's like everything's extreme. I don't think that's true, right? So what I think is more important is, like, you got to figure out yourself, right? The most important thing you can know is yourself, right? I go back to this Mark Twain quote almost every single day. I was just on a pod the other day, and I said it, like, 2 most important days in your life: the day you're born, the day you know why, right? Finding yourself, being self-aware, super important, right? So it's not about money. It's not about finances. It's not about, like, lifestyle. It comes down to, like, what is important to you. And what I always tell people is, like, when people say to me, like, here's what's important to me, Pete, I make them pull their phone out, make them show me their calendar. Show me how you spend your time, and I'll show you what's important to you. And I got no judgment on that, right? If you want to spend, 90% of your life, like, meditating and doing yoga and 10% of your life only like doing whatever it is, I don't care, right? But if you want to spend your life like being the best basketball player or the best like sports player, you better do that, you know? So I think that there's a sense of balance that like, I don't believe in balance, I believe in harmony. And it's an interesting concept because I think this idea of work-life balance is not possible. Like you can't have work-life balance, but then also, you know, have millions of dollars, right? Like, so if all of those things are important to you, you have to sort of dial in a framework or a formula that makes sense. So I don't think that progress is a privileged thing. And that's easy for me to say as like, you know, as a white guy, I've got a sense of privilege and I don't want to ignore that privilege and be a jerk. But I also worked my ass off for everything I have. You know, I've been grinding my face off since I was 17 years old.
Well, almost to death, basically, right? I mean,
almost to death.
A nervous breakdown can lead. It's certainly not an easy thing to get through. People do crack completely, jump off bridges and stuff. Yeah. So,
but if I had to do it all over again, Chad, like what I would say is like, the reason why I think that happened is because I wasn't connected to what I was really here to do. And at the time, the scoreboard for me was more revenue, better margins, happy clients, happy teams. That was my only scoreboard. Now my scoreboard is I've got this belief in the world where I think creativity and curiosity is broken. And I think that when we don't have creativity and curiosity in our work life, in our personal life, I think it leads to a lot of bad things. When we do have it, I think we've got that much more in the tank. We're filling our cups up. We're able to unlock that many more things. So for me, like, I don't think it's about this or that. I don't think it's about like, there's no magic formula for anybody except for the magic formula for yourself. So I think you've got to have that self-awareness and you can do amazing things. Like I love the fact that like here I am on a Friday with you guys working holiday weekend and I love doing what I do. Right. And like, I'm going to hang up this call with you guys and jump on a client call and do some cool stuff with a client. But I love that. But that's my choice, right? If I decided today I want to go to the beach.
That's your calendar, Pete.
That's my calendar, right?
Yeah.
And I am fierce with my calendar. But I used to not be. I used to be like a Raggedy Ann doll, just like going back and forth, kind of getting like lobbed around. And
so that can I cue in right there? When
cue
around? Listen, think about it. That's to steal your life back. When you're out of control, life has got you completely in its grips. Like you have to steal that back. That's what we're talking about there.
Amen, brother.
Steal that part back. That's one of the main principles of this podcast is steal your life back, people, because it will rip you to shreds if you're not the one holding the wheel. So
Amen, brother.
Love that. Thank you. I love that you said scoreboard. Like, what's your scoreboard? What are you really comparing yourself to and why? Ask that. Put that in your journal. Always ask questions in your journal with a question mark, right? Don't just, it's not statements. Who are you talking to anyway? Like you're trying to figure yourself out. You better ask yourself some questions. And I love the way you explained the calendar and like that, build your calendar. That's building your life, right? And when you look back, oh yeah, that was a well-played calendar, right? And you can do that. Like you can plan your day. You can plan the next 15 minutes if you want.
Yep.
But just remember, you're the one in control. And so I think that's amazing. So that's empowering, really. And just, take that power back and do something good with it and serve. And I think to add to your level of purpose that you said, Pete, it's, for me, in my story, it's when you have the ability to serve, you then find purpose. Because if you're doing it just for you or some delusional scoreboard, you won't find it. You'll just keep running until you hit the brick wall or jump off that bridge. The idea is that you are in service in such a degree like that those people are relying on you, your family's relying on you, your kids, and you're relying on yourself to be the best version of yourself for everyone. And I think that's really, really cool, man. So this Ikigai started such an interesting conversation. I love it. Do you want to dive into one more fun corporate mantra, Pete? I think you'd like this one.
Let's do it.
You down? Ready? You remember this? This is old, and you guys have heard it a million times over. Work hard, play hard. You know what I'm talking about, right? These philosophies are like entwined, and they were for me. Like I was in construction, and I was a general contractor, and man, we used to just like it was burning daylight, and then as soon as the sun went down, like that's not when we shut it off. Like that was when the party really got started, right? But it's all day, all night kind of lifestyle. But that's It's not sustainable. And why are you doing that? What are you winning?
Yeah. Totally.
Right? There's no scoreboard at all. Like nobody's winning even a point. Like there's just no forward momentum. You're never doing the time, the work on yourself. You're not putting a calendar together. You just wake up and there is the day is waiting for you again. It's just going to gobble you up. And at the end of the day, it spits you out. You go to sleep, gobbles you back up, spits you out. And then you're like, well, I just feel like I'm helpless. Well, you are, because you gave up on yourself. You stopped being in control of your day to day and where the heck you're going. And
I also think too, like one thing I would say, so it's funny you mentioned that mantra, like one of the things my dad taught me when I was like a little kid that still stuck with me, and I'm really grateful for it, was work hard, play harder, is what he used to always say to me. And my dad was a blue collar
One little tweak on that. That's
but I remember like I actually have it on a T-shirt, because literally like it just drove a lot of the things that I do, and I think because my background's in entrepreneurship and engineering, like I think of everything through like the loops of like inputs, outputs, outcomes, right? So for me, what I want to say to the listeners that are listening to this is like, you can also dictate boundaries in your life if you work for somebody else. Like it doesn't just have to be for entrepreneurs or starting your own business. You don't have to like burn your life down to like have a happy, fulfilled life. Like, you know, like right now, like my employees don't work nights and weekends, right? Like in the beginning, first 10 years of our business, we were all working nights and weekends, right? Now, like my employees in all of my businesses, and I have many, none of them are working nights and weekends. And if they are working a night and a weekend, it's because they want to, not because they have to. And it's not because of that. Like we have a whole thing where like we're sending, I send an email in the middle of the night sometimes, it gets pre-scheduled and it hits their inbox at 8 a.m. because I don't want them seeing emails coming into their phone late at night.
Yeah.
You know, like that's an important precedent to set, is what we model. But what I was saying is like, you can set your calendar up where, like, a perfect example, I got a designer on my team, and she dips out in the middle of the afternoon every day to go to, like, do yoga and to do a thing. No one cares, because at the end of the day, it's not about, like, putting that forced boundary on to say, like, you need to work a 9 to 5. It's like, hey, we've agreed. What is the input? Like, we need this much work to happen every single week because we can bill this much for clients.
As long as you're getting the job done.
As long as you're getting the job done. So it's as long as you get the work done, right? But I think that flexibility goes a million miles a minute, because it's like you can be in a job and set boundaries with your boss based on what is the scoreboard, what needs to get done. And I think at the end of the day, like inputs drive outputs and outputs drive outcomes. And I just want to put that out there, because I think that a lot of times people might hear this and go, that's easy for all you entrepreneurs to say, because you run your own businesses and people work for you. But
yeah, but can you? This is like a pseudo entrepreneur position. If you're creating a culture like this is like, not that you're taking on all the risks, but you're still operating holistically like an entrepreneur in that seat, right? So, and there's room for growth then, because otherwise there's no room for growth, right? Because if you're just hammering people, you're technically pushing them as well to that breaking point.
Yeah,
you just know who wants that. Nobody wants that.
No, and I think that's where it's like, I think like mental health is at an all-time low in this country right now, definitely in the world, but in the country. I think we're still feeling the effects of the isolation that COVID brought about for people. And I think that like making sure people understand why they're doing what they do and how their contributions really matter, whether it's a small contribution or a big contribution, like the small things are the big things. So I think that that's a big thing that like I've realized for a very long time, is like people want to know how they're contributing to the mission. They want to know how they're contributing to those types of things. And that's where I think that like, you talk about like that fire your boss Fridays moment, right? Which is where it's like, unfortunately, the thing that we are all going to be a slave to is time, right? Because we only have so much of it. So I think that how we spend it is something that we have to be really mindful of, whether it's working for someone else, working for ourselves, spending time with our families, whatever the thing is like, I feel like people have to understand more about like what they want. And that's why I'm a big believer in like vision setting and like manifesting the vision, is like, talk about in the journal, right? It's like, write down the thing that you want and then reverse engineer it, right? So it's like, okay, if you want like a material thing or a moment or an experience to happen.
I love that Pete. That's beautiful. It seems so easy, brother, doesn't it? I mean, come on. Like, you're saying it like it's, we'll just do this. And people will scoff at that. But you're obviously saying this because it's a practice you do.
100%.
Right? And I'm similar. I'm just on the same level where it's like, you just reverse engineering your thing, and you're building a blueprint. I look at it like from the construction standpoint, and I think this would be a great analogy for you, Pete, and you can steal it, man. So when you have a thought in your mind, right? You don't know what I'm thinking. You don't know what my dreams are, Pete, right? But if I put those down on paper, now Pete can see my dreams. Lisa can see my dreams. This guy can. Now, if I not just put it down on paper, but I build a blueprint of that dream, now I actually don't even have to be there. Like in construction, I could design the whole project and put a good blueprint together, and I can hire people to help me achieve my dream.
Yeah, I call it 10-80-10.
I saw that on your website, the 10-80-10. It's basically the same concept.
Yeah. And I've been just saying this because the way I learned, just through my own personal life and experiences, and that's interesting. So at least tap into that. Where did you see that on Pete's site?
Well, it's just on his site, so I think have him.
So tell us, let's explore that, because I'm interested in hearing it from your perspective versus how I look at the world through a contractor's point of view, right, and a designer, and it's like you could make your dreams come true. In fact, you just design them is technically all you have to do, and there's people out there willing to help you get them.
Yeah, 100%. So, it's funny that you say I use a lot of contractor language in my life, even though I can barely hang a picture on the wall.
Talk a big game, do you, Pete?
Yeah. No, I do. Like it's like, for example, in my core business, Digital Surgeons, we have a process that we call a demand blueprint. And the blueprint is a specific auditing process, the same way that an architect would design a blueprint and then work with a construction company. So we have a blueprint. A lot of that language we use in that is around those metaphors. I was on a call yesterday with a client, large international client in the sports world, golf world specifically, and we're helping them with a bunch of stuff. And what I was doing on the call with the team is, there was some mismanagement of expectations. There were some aspirations that were big. And the metaphor I use is, I said, okay, we have to really nail down what the experience is, what the content is. Because when I know where the tub is going to go in the bathroom and the size it's going to be, I can't change the position of the tub later after I start building out this room. So it's funny, as someone who's never done any of this stuff.
Talking like you put a bathtub in before, but but you're just trying to get the point across. It's because that's people can relate to that.
People can relate to it. It's way more than like some of the gobbledygook and the words that we use. But to answer Lisa's question, so I came across this concept called 10-80-10, and really where the concept came about, I've read about the same kind of percentages. Like I feel like in business you hear like 80-20 a lot, which is the Pareto principle. You hear 10-80-10. So for me, I started to understand like where I was going wrong, right? And I learned this like over a lot of mistakes over a lot of years. Is like I used to be involved.
The hard way, listeners. He learned it the hard way.
I learned it the hard way. But what 10-80-10 basically is like you upfront 10%. You set that vision. You make it super clear, super visceral. People understand the why, the what, the how, all that. Then you hand it to the team, and you really empower the team to rock out that 80% in the middle. And then you want to come back around that final 10%, and you want to make sure that the finishing, right, back another contractor metaphor, the finishing at the end of that is really in line with the vision of that. So when I came across that, I was thinking I wanted to start to connect back to like, what does that look like? And I started digging into creative processes, right? Because I'm very big into like not losing my spirit of creativity. And I actually came across Andy Warhol and the work he did. And this is why I tell people they have to go out and explore, right? Don't be afraid to consume content. I actually watched this Andy Warhol documentary, and I learned about The Factory, which was basically his studio where like some of the coolest people in the art and the music world used to come and hang out in the city, right? New York City, excuse me. And what he basically figured out was how to manufacture at scale amazing art based on a process and a vision that he had. Right. So I think there's something special to be said about that, especially now in this world we're entering where people are talking about ChatGPT and AI and all this other kind of crazy stuff all over the place. Is like the upfront 10% is vision setting with you and your organization. That 80% is making sure. What I used to do back in the day, I thought I was helpful. I thought I was helpful by like working with the team and being there every step of the way. But the reality, I was micromanaging. The reality is I wasn't doing a good enough job communicating. And also, when you take away someone's ability to fail and someone's ability to make those mistakes and experiment their own, you're actually not leading them. Then you're just doing their job for them. So when I sort of had that like big revelation, I was like, oh shit, like if I can set the vision in the upfront, if I can make sure they know I'm here if they need me, right? So we can check in, we can have those one-on-ones, we can get back in calibration if we need it. I'm here. Call me, tag me in. But if I don't hear from you, where you're going to see me again is at this final 10% where we're aligning to make sure that upfront vision came to life. And I started experimenting with that. And I was like, all right, well, if Andy Warhol can do this and this really successful startup founder can do it, maybe I can do it too. And the challenge is, it's like, well, that sounds easy for someone listening to this. Like, oh, you're basically getting 80% of your work done for you, Pete. What they don't realize is that 10%, to be able to make that vision so visceral and so clear, is actually a lot of work, right? You got to get really good at communication. You got to get really good at like manifesting what that vision looks like. Not everyone has that skill set. That's my skill set.
Translation of the way you look at the world and how everyone else is going to see it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not about good or bad or indifferent. It's like, the thing to remember is I spent 15 years doing 100% of the process, right? So then I was privileged enough to have some clients that trusted me, that we built some things together, and then I made an investment, and then that investment was in people. Then I made an investment, and that was in technology. And I made an investment, and that was in businesses. Before you know it, you got that 10-80-10 moving, but it doesn't happen overnight. There's no easy button on the keyboard, like easy.
Right.
Boom.
Well,
I just hit the easy button.
The easiest part is just to tell yourself that you can do this, and there's people like Pete out who kind of paved the way for you, that, moving things out of the way, and just trust that like you'll solve those problems if you're being humble enough to like take that journey. So, but when we're talking about 10-80-10, am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Okay. And I love it, by the way. Clearly, it's already part of me, but now I'm seeing that someone else has manifested it in their own version. It's really cool. Who is this for? Like, you're obviously, it sounds to me like creating something from nothing, but what about people who have already got an established business? How does that apply?
So I actually think the only where it works is with an established business. So when I think about 10-80-10, it's looking at like the full funnel of a business. I think in the beginning, when you're a solopreneur, when you're bootstrapping, whether you've raised capital, you're using your own, that's where the first thing you're doing is you're wearing every hat in the beginning when you first start a business. And at least in my experiences and the business owners that I know, it isn't until you either have raised capital or have generated enough income to be able to start hiring people is where you start to give your Lego blocks away. You start to take those hats off, right? I'm no longer going to be the one doing my own bookkeeping, right? That was the first job I gave away, right? It was like, I'm not going to be doing the bookkeeping.
Hey, you remote bookkeepers listening?
Yeah. First job I gave away, right? It was finance and making sure like I set the metrics on what I wanted to know. I had access to all the tools, so I could watch everything going in and out. And then, but like that wasn't a good use of my time. That was one of my first hires, right? One of my like second hires after that was there was too much code to be writing and I couldn't write it all myself. So I hired a programmer, right? I hired a developer. Then there's too much design work and I couldn't do all the design work. So then I hired a designer. So you sort of see the process here is like but I think the challenge is a lot of people get away from what lights them up, right? Like I started a creative agency because I love being a creative, but then I was really miserable in that middle point, which is probably what led to some of that crazy story stuff I shared earlier, was all the stuff I love to do, coming up with the ideas and working with clients to make their visions come true and like really shaping all that. Like I love to do that work. And then I was giving that away. Then I hired a creative director.
Wow.
Then that creative
without even knowing what kind of, because you're in the mix, right? You're just like trying to get stuff done, next steps.
Yeah,
right?
So you start hiring away the jobs you love. So what I tell people is like, think about the shit you love to do. Think about the stuff that you don't love to do. And I have an exercise, I wrote about it on my website, so Lisa probably saw it because she sounds like she's doing all that crazy research, is like getting into your green zone, right? It's like, how do you find your zone of genius, right? The stuff that you love to do, that you want to do, that lights you up, optimize for green and turn down the red, right? And that comes back down to that journal entry you talked about, like Chad, it's like writing down, like, I always say, like, do a time audit, right? So like what I tell people is like, pull your calendar out. If you have a printer, print it out. If you are only digital, you can do it digitally. But what I did is I printed out my calendar for a couple weeks and I started to take a highlighter, like red, yellow, green, and highlight the stuff where my time was going. And I realized like I can directly correlate when I have a week or a tough day, I look at what I'm doing. And there's certain types of activities that really bring about that red, that draining energy. And there's certain types of activities that really bring about green.
Can't sleep that. You go to bed, you're like, I'm not even tired. Like, let's just keep going, right? And then those times where you just fall face first in the bed.
Yeah, and there's obviously like biological limitations to that, right? There's nights where I'm like, I wish I could keep grinding. Like when I was in my 20s, I would pull all-nighters doing shit, and I'd love it, right? But now it's like, I got a kid to show up for. Like if he's not sleeping, my son's 2. It's like, and then you run out of gas. You're like, the next day I gotta be high octane. So like, I gotta sleep, like, unfortunately we all have to sleep, but,
unfortunately,
well, no, because like,
it's true. I mean, it's because the daunting task of being an entrepreneur. I mean, cause you don't quit. It's not like, oh, well, I'm all done. All right. Well, we did all the entrepreneuring. That's all. We can put it all away. So.
Yeah, and I love what I'm doing too, and that's the hard part. Like, I didn't mention it earlier, but I'm guessing the audience can figure it out themselves. Like, I've got a little bit of like, ADHD shiny object syndrome, where it's like I love to be exploring the next thing, right? So, like right now, I'm all in on like automating myself. I've been writing about it recently, which is like, it's weird.
Where can we see more of that writing that you're working on for that? Like what?
I
found your blog, but
so I write on Medium quite a bit. It's just Pete Sena. Okay. I also write a free biweekly newsletter that I put out, and lately I've just been chronicling and journaling how I'm replacing myself with AI. So it was crazy. Like I'm gonna tell you guys a story because I'm a pretty busy guy. Like you guys are busy folks too, right? And like this week, I had like this Tuesday, my calendar was planned, booked to do a bunch of stuff, and I'm like, what do you mean? I don't have to do any of this stuff. And it was because I used to have all this stuff planned for my Tuesday was like my content creation day. And I automated like almost all of it with AIs. So now I'm like, all right, now I've got the research done for me. I've got the transcripts done for me. I've got it communicating on my behalf. And I'm like, I just saved like a full 8 hours because, but it was like every week I'm going to do one more thing. That's the thing with building a business, right? Is like set that vision. One more thing.
Isn't this the journey in itself? I love it that you're taking it, to the fullest extent, because in the beginning we are bootstrapping, right? And you're giving up all your time and sweat equity and putting in all of it. But in the end, the only reason you're doing all of it is just to buy back your time. And especially if you want to level up, right? Like you're just like, I'm going to get back my 40 hours. I'm going to do it again. I'm going to build something else. And then eventually you want that time back, because the whole goal is to do what you want, when you want, with who you want, right? That's, and then when you have a choice, that's really freedom. Whether you're working or not, it's your choice to do what you're doing. That's the sense of freedom. You're not forced to. It doesn't have to be done. There's no deadlines. And so that's really, really cool, man. So, and that's clearly new. So that didn't even exist in your mind, like last year? Right.
I mean, it wasn't possible last year, right? To be candid, like last year, and we can go like a little bit more in the weeds if it's helpful. But like as an example, we got these things called large language models, right? And I think that anybody who doesn't know the impact that's going to make on their business, if you do any type of consulting work or service-oriented work, like your entire job is going to be disrupted because of these technologies. Like full stop. Like I'll give you an example. We're on a podcast right now. We use Riverside, right? When we use Riverside, we've got software now that can basically automatically make clips. We've got software now that can, automatically like email people and do things and trigger off.
All right, we're calling you, Pete. Nicole, get Pete on the line. Let's see what he's got. I'm kidding.
Happy to, but the point is like none of this was possible, right? So like now there are certain tasks that would take a talented person with 10 years experience, 40 to 60 hours of time to do, that now you have tools and technologies that you can click a button and automate and replace all these things. Now it's crazy, but like for me, like let's say Nicole's that person for you, just use an example, right?
Yeah.
Now, instead of Nicole having to go and spend 40 hours cleaning up audio and cutting certain things with video, now Nicole can say, I'm going to spend 40 hours coming up with, better shots for Chad and Lisa, and like how we're going to like, stage this directly or
better hair shots, Pete. I hear what you're saying.
Whatever it is, right?
I'm just messing with you.
But this is the thing where I think that all these tools can unlock people, not replace people.
Right.
And so for me, to answer your question, a year ago, it wasn't possible. These tools weren't out there. So a year ago, like, yeah, I could have virtual assistants, executive assistants. I could have different people that focus on different delivery parts of my business. And I did, right? But now what's possible is like, there's stuff that I used to have to do that now I've got different technologies that I'm cobbling together that do it for me. And that's where I'm like super excited. So I'm staying up late at night. I'm like, I'm putting my wife goes to bed pretty early. I put my kid to bed, and I'm like staying up late, like instead of like watching Netflix, I'm tinkering with these different AIs, and I'm like, wait a minute, what if I could replace this or replace that?
And this isn't actually what you do as like a service to the world, right? Like this is just you making your service to the world a more efficient machine, right? So you can serve at a higher level.
Yeah, 100%. I mean,
right,
so
right.
for the audience, like I'm a branding and marketing guy. Like that's what I do, right? So most of the businesses that I invest in or that I've built. So my first business was a digital agency. Started that in my dorm room, built that up. That afforded me the privilege to be able to start angel investing in other people's businesses. Some of those, created some nice returns for me financially. That's been like, I've put my time and energy and investments into things that storytelling, marketing, branding can help improve ROI and unlock ROI, right? Some people invest in ATM machines or in, building like laundromats. I've got a friend who buys laundromats and flips them, or does real estate. Like,
and so do you serve that? Like he owns this laundromat. Like, what's your product and branding? Like, who do you target? Who do you not target? Who shouldn't call you Pete? Right, solopreneurs. Right, that's not. We talked about that. Right.
Yeah, so I would say, my audience is essentially 3 different buckets, right? So all my audience is, I'd say, venture-backed startup founders. I do a lot of work in the software as a service space, like in the software tech type of companies. So venture-backed startups that have a product or service that they want to sell more of, really good fit for me and my team. Challenger brands are a really good fit. So brands that are like late stage, but they're looking to take it to the next level. Maybe they're not number 1 or number 2 in their category. They might be like number 3 or number 4, but they want to move up market. Great client for us because I've worked with a lot of those. And then the third client segment, I'd say, is like enterprise businesses that are like Fortune 1000 that are looking to go to the next level. So the work that I do primarily with like entrepreneurs and their business is, I don't do a ton of coaching, private coaching, because I did it for a bit. It's fun, but it takes up a lot of time. So now what I try to do is, rather than kind of selling those types of services, one of the things I will do for startup founders is I'll come in as a fractional CMO, and I'll come in and help them build, like turn the vision into an actionable plan, build the team, find the teammates. And typically that's like a 90 to 100 day plan where I'll come in and do that. Most recently I did that for a startup founder. When I started working with him, he was a 5-figure business. 90 days later, he's a 7-figure business, right? And that's a big jump, right? In terms of like being able to grow. And people might be like, well, what'd you do? Well, the reality is all I did is I turned the information in his head. I helped him find a bunch more customers that I was already buying from him. I basically said, okay, who's your best customer? I did some fancy data stuff. Again, it was a DTC company. I don't want to get too in the weeds unless you want me to, but I basically did some of what I do, figured out what was it about the super customer. I believe every business has a super customer. If you can find that super customer, define that super customer, and really break it down into some very simple building blocks, then to go out and find a bunch more people just like that, it's pretty easy to do. So we built a simple model. It's called a cohort model. We figured out what that cohort looked like. We put together some messaging, some materials to kind of really find that person and convert that person. And then we went out and found a bunch more people like that and created lots of revenue and sales. And now they jumped
so what
up
do you
to the
you
next
got
level.
a podcast too? What do you talk about on the podcast? I only watched one episode, like once I finally started doing my research on you. But do you tap into the weeds? You talked about going in the weeds. What's some of the topics you do on your podcast?
Yeah. So our podcast is called Forward Obsessed. And on that podcast, we interview people who have built and sold companies. So typically they're what we call breakthrough business leaders, people who have built a company, exited a company. And my partner and I, we're just fascinated with entrepreneurship, right? In terms of like, what is it about that entrepreneurial like DNA? Where does it come from? From when you grow up, when you're a kid, what it is. And we study the patterns. So, not dissimilar from a Tim Ferriss or a Guy Raz with their podcasts. Like we go in, we dig into the pitfalls, the pivots of a business, and then we're kind of harvesting that knowledge. And when we first got started, we were like, all right, let's interview our friends. Many of our friends were entrepreneurs, have built and sold businesses. And now that network's starting to expand. Last week we interviewed one of the people who was on the founding team of MailChimp, founding team of JetBlue. So all different types of businesses. And what we're seeing is this pattern of what makes them all tick. And what makes them all tick from, these women who have taken companies public to different people who have done different things is like, they've got a clear vision in their head. They understand how to create a sliver and blow up the market in a big way and just drive massive growth. And that's typically what we've seen in almost all the people we've interviewed on that show is like, what's the DNA strand of an entrepreneur? And we're all wired a little bit differently, right? Like I hear it with you, Chad, right? It's like you weren't always as purpose driven as you are right now.
No.
I can tell
well, you know, music was going to be my thing, right? So I was going to be a rock star, my man, Pete. That was my goal, my dream. But see, that doesn't look like almost everything else in the whole. There's almost nothing that lines up perfectly with being a performing artist, like in the business world per se. And
you couldn't go be Nickelback's manager back in the day?
No, but we are going to Nickelback here in a couple weeks. We're going to go up to Salt Lake City and see him at one of our favorite outdoor venues. So we're pretty excited about that.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I was purpose driven. It's just weird. It wasn't money at all. It was art, like creating, bringing things to the world that never existed. And all the money and the fame, that was all a byproduct. Like when I finally retired, just to validate your question, or your comment, was that in the end, I just realized, man, I actually just love creating things that didn't exist the day before. I thought that was really, really cool. I love that. So I definitely carry that over into what we're doing now. But it's Pete, dude, you've been awesome. You are a force to be reckoned with, my man.
Thanks, man.
You know, I say that because 3 or 4 times we were like, well, we could go in the weeds. Well, Pete has more to share, people. All right, so get on his podcast. Listen to more what he has. There's plenty more to dive in there, but it's been super insightful with him and his story and the Ikigai, how we came together. My opinion is the Ikigai story. So maybe check that out for yourself, see how it helps you. But remember, guys, it's inspiring to see how Pete has put this all together for himself, all the way from that breakdown. Just know that, like, you know, don't give up and go for it. So if this episode resonates with you, Pete, is there anything you could do special for our guests? Do you have like any sort of free info or anything? Was there any sort of link or anything we could send them to?
Yeah. So I am really big into helping people out. So I have taken a lot of the things that we do and put them into a bunch of free toolkits. Okay. And the toolkits are on a site called Think Forward. Okay. So I'll make sure that you get a copy of that. And on that, we've got a bunch of brainstorming exercises, vision exercises. We've put them all on the website. They're all 100% free. You can download them.
That's on the surgeon's website.
That's on Think Forward website. So I'll pop the link in the chat here just so everybody gets it.
And then with that said, who is that for and who's that not for? Just so people know, like, I don't want anyone to waste their time on anything, but I definitely, if they do need it, like, you should check it out. So who's it for and not for, Pete? Could you help us with that?
100%. What the Think Forward toolkit is all about is it's tools, it's templates, and it's activities that are going to help you and your team to unlock new possibilities, right? So your team could be your significant other. Your team could be your kids if they're like over 15. Your team could be the people that work with you or for you, your client partners. There are a lot of kind of like, almost think of them as like brain teaser exercises, you know, things like, if you're trying to build a business, here's how you can do an elevator pitch pretty quickly. Here's how you can mash up different ideas to generate new ideas. Here's how you could find your Ikigai. So what I would say is Think Forward is all about like creating a community of people who are thinking creatively and innovatively about how to reframe the world that we live in today. So it can be used for both business activities and personal activities. It's really got a lot of different
that's cool.
Use
cool.
cases.
So yeah, essentially, I can't see anyone who couldn't use that then. I don't think that you couldn't. That seems like a really something you should at least be practicing on. Yeah. You know, for
they
yourself.
They tend to be oriented towards business, right? So like, for example.
But still, yeah, like you said, personal, right? Personal growth.
But I had some the other day send us an email and they said that they used one of the exercises at like a dating thing, like a dating event or something, and I guess it helped them with telling their story. So I had never heard that one before. So to the person that emailed me on that, thank you. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff we put out. I'd say, like, in terms of your question about like free stuff, like almost all the content I put out is 100% free, right? Like I don't kind of paywall it or gatekeep it or whatever. I try to, like, when something's worked for me, I try to step by step explain to people how to do it. What I found is that some people don't have the time or the interest to do it themselves, and in which case, if they're a business, we can help them. But for the most part, like, I'm just trying to put out as much as I can out there because this stuff didn't exist when I needed it most, right? So now I'm just like the team is always pumping out new stuff, and I'm pumping out new stuff wherever I can, and I hope it helps people. So
we're trying to tenfold the world with AI and free information, right? Because the world will fold over, right? Eventually, things will start to, and they do with technology, but even just individuals and personal growth should be growing faster than the generations before you. There's no reason you shouldn't be, and they are. The young kids today, I see, I just sit there and talk with them like, you're like decades ahead of where I was riding my BMX bike, like, holy cow, this guy's like, really? You're talking about, stocks and just the things you just were nowhere near your vocabulary. So, but anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in to Fire Your Boss Fridays. Fridays are always my favorite days, no matter what I'm doing. So remember, your life is waiting to be reclaimed. Your boss is waiting to be fired. Don't tell him or her. And that life full of purpose is ready to be lived. So until next time, this is Chad and Lisa and our good friend Pete, whom we got to know here today. And we are signing off. Thanks for hanging out with us today.